Around here, you earn respect. Sadly, nobody here will give it to you.
Officer Dale waited for a reaction. Officer Denise gave him none.
What, you think staying quiet makes you look tough? You know what? Maybe this will finally teach you your place.
Without hesitation, he picked up his cup and dumped the drink over her head. Denise wiped coffee from her face and looked directly at Dale.
I'm gonna need your badge number, officer.
Officer Dale had no idea that the badge number Denise was about to request would be the first item on her desk as the precinct's new captain. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The coffee in Denise's travel mug had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She didn't drink it. She just held it, both hands wrapped around the cup, and stared at the building across the street. Westfield Police Department. 9th Precinct. Her precinct. The sign above the front door was faded. One of the lights behind it had burned out, so the W in Westfield sat dark, while the rest of the letters glowed pale yellow in the early morning. The parking lot was half full already. Officers moved in and out of the front entrance in ones and twos, laughing, punching each other's shoulders, carrying coffee cups from the shop on the corner. Denise watched them and said nothing. She'd been sitting in this car for 11 minutes. Not because she was scared. She needed to see them before they saw her. She needed to understand what she was walking into before she walked into it. Her phone buzzed. She already knew who it was. "You still in the car?" Deputy Chief Harold Washington. 61 years old, 30 years on the force, and he still checked in like a worried father. She typed back, "Getting ready." His response came fast. "Denise, you can still walk in there with your bars on. Just say the word." She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Plain patrol uniform. No insignia. Her ID badge read, D. Montana, Officer. Technically accurate. Strategically perfect. She typed, "I need to see who they really are, not who they perform to be." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Be careful." She put the phone in her pocket, picked up her bag, and got out of the car. The lobby of the 9th smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. A desk officer barely looked up when she walked in. She signed the visitor log, habit, and moved down the main hall toward the break room. She had memorized the building layout 2 nights ago. She knew exactly where she was going. The break room was at the end of the east hallway. She could hear it before she reached it. Loud voices, laughter, the scrape of chairs on a hard floor. She pushed the door open. The room held 6 people. 4 men standing near the coffee station, loud and loose, still riding whatever joke had just landed. A 5th man, broad-shouldered, square jaw, the kind of good-looking that knew it, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, holding court. And in the far corner, nearly invisible, a young woman in uniform staring at her phone like she was trying to disappear into it. Denise walked to the coffee station. She reached past one of the standing officers and picked up the pot. The loud man at the counter stopped talking. She felt his eyes before she heard his voice. "Hold on." The voice was smooth, almost friendly. Almost. "You lost, sweetheart?" She didn't look up. She filled her cup. "I'm talking to you." His voice had an edge now. Still wearing its smile, but the smile had teeth. "New faces check in at the front desk. Not the break room." She turned and looked at him for the first time. He was young, her age, maybe even a year or 2 younger. Badge on his chest. Sergeant's stripes on his sleeve. Name tag. Penfield. His eyes moved over her slowly, top to bottom. The way men look at things they've already decided don't belong. "I found the break room just fine," she said. "Thank you." One of the other officers laughed. Penfield's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. "Oh, she talks," he said. More laughter. Louder now. Listen. He pushed off the counter and took a step toward her. Slow, easy, like he had all the time in the world. I don't know what precinct you transferred from, but we got a way of doing things here. And part of that is— He paused and looked at the others, performing for them now. Knowing your place. The room went a little quieter. Denise looked at him. She said nothing. She brought her coffee cup to her lips and took a slow sip. That silence, that total, unbothered silence, did something to Penfield's face. A muscle in his jaw ticked. His chin came up. He glanced over his shoulder at the others. A slow grin spread across his face, wide and deliberate, the kind that meant he had already decided what came next, and wanted an audience for it. "You know what?" he said, turning back to her. "I should explain something to you. Since you're new." He clasped his hands together like a teacher about to begin a lesson. "Every new officer who walks through that door, they go through a little tradition. It's how we do things here at the 9th. Kind of a—" He tilted his head, savoring the word, "ritual." Behind him, Steck let out a short laugh. The others shifted, leaning in. "A welcome ritual," Penfield continued. His voice was warm, almost kind. That was the worst part, how kind it sounded. "Every single new officer goes through it, no exceptions." He spread his hands wide, like he was being perfectly reasonable. "It's not personal, it's just tradition." Denise looked at him. "Is that right?" It wasn't a question. "That's right." His grin got wider. He picked up the large cup of iced coffee sitting on the counter beside him. He held it loosely, casually, swinging it slightly at his side. The ice rattled inside. "We like to make sure our new people understand how things work around here. Make sure they know their place from day one." He paused. His eyes locked onto hers. "Helps avoid confusion later on." The room was very quiet now. Everyone waiting. Everyone watching. Penfield looked back at his audience one more time, and whatever he saw there, those eager, grinning faces, seemed to settle something in him. He looked back at Denise. "Welcome to the 9th," he said, and he raised the cup over her head and poured. The iced coffee came down in a long, slow cascade. It soaked through her braids. It ran down the back of her neck. It spread cold and dark across the shoulders of her uniform, dripping down her back, pooling at her collar. The room erupted, howling, hollering. Steck doubled over, slapping the counter. Two officers grabbed each other's arms, barely staying upright. The laughter hit the walls and bounced back, filling every corner of the room. Penfield stood in front of her, empty cup in hand, grinning from ear to ear. Waiting, expecting to see her face crumble. Expecting tears, or rage, or the frantic, embarrassed scramble of someone who didn't know how to handle themselves. He got none of it. Denise stood exactly where she was, both feet planted, shoulders straight. The coffee dripped from the ends of her braids onto the floor in a slow, steady rhythm. One drop, then another, then another. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't move a single muscle in her face. She just looked at him. Not with anger. Not with hurt. With something Penfield clearly had no category for. A total iron calm that made his grin flicker for just a half-second before he caught it and held it in place. The laughter around him started to thin at the edges. A few of the officers who'd been howling began to quiet, watching her with something that wasn't quite amusement anymore. Denise reached out slowly and set her coffee cup down on the counter. Perfectly level. No trembling, no rush. Then she turned her head and looked at Penfield the way a person looks at something they are filing away permanently. "I'm going to need your badge number," she said. The laughter surged back, louder than before, fed by relief. Penfield rattled his badge in her face. Steck sang the number out in a mocking voice, dragging out each digit. The others echoed it back like it was the punchline to the greatest joke they'd ever heard. She memorized it. She memorized every number, every face, every laugh. The young woman in the corner had not made a sound. She was staring at her hands so hard it looked like she was trying to read something written on them. Denise memorized her, too. Then she turned and walked out of the break room. Back straight. Steps even. Not one moment of hesitation. The laughter followed her all the way down the hall. She led it. The restroom at the end of the east hallway was single occupancy. Denise locked the door behind her. The laughter from the break room was still audible. Muffled now, but there. She could hear it bleeding through the walls, rising and falling in waves. Someone kept setting it off again every time it started to die down. Probably Steck. He had that kind of energy. The kind that needed to keep poking at something long after the moment had passed. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back at her was soaked. Her braids hung heavy and dark against her shoulders. A slow drip ran from the ends and fell onto the tile floor. The collar of her uniform had gone from navy blue to nearly black, where the iced coffee had soaked through. A faint, sticky residue was already forming along her hairline. She turned on the cold tap. She cupped water in both hands and pressed it against the back of her neck. Then she straightened up and looked at herself again. She had been here before. Not in this bathroom, not in this building, but in this moment, this exact moment. She had been here more times than she could count. 15 years on the force. 15 years of rooms that fell quiet when she walked in. Of paperwork that got lost. Of credit that went somewhere else. Of being watched for any crack, any flinch, any sign that she didn't belong. She had never given them one. She wasn't going to start today. She grabbed a handful of paper towels and pressed them against her braids, working from root to end. Slow, methodical. She blotted her collar as best she could. It wasn't enough to fix it, but it was enough to face the room. She thought about Washington's voice that morning. Be careful. She thought about Penfield's face, that wide, performed grin right before he lifted the cup. The way he'd looked back at his audience first, making sure they were watching. The way he'd called it a tradition, a ritual. Said it like he was doing her a favor. Said it like he had done it 100 times before. Because he had. That was the part that settled in her chest like a stone. Not the drink. Not the laughter. The ease of it. The complete and total comfort of a man who had done this. Some version of this, over and over again, and had never once faced a consequence for it. Until now. She dried her hands. She straightened her uniform. She looked at herself one last time in the mirror. Damp collar, coffee-stained shoulders, braids still heavy. And she made a decision that she felt in her whole body. The way you feel a door closing behind you. She unlocked the door and walked out. The main assembly room was filling up by the time she reached it. 8:27 a.m., 3 minutes before the shift briefing. She took a seat in the third row. Center. Not the back, not tucked to the side. Center, where she could see every face in the room and every face could see her. Penfield came in 2 minutes later with Steck at his shoulder. They were still loose and easy, riding the tail end of the morning's entertainment. Penfield spotted her immediately. His eyes moved over her damp uniform, and one corner of his mouth pulled up. He dropped into a seat in the front row without breaking stride. Steck followed. He leaned over and said something low to Penfield, and Penfield's shoulders shook once with a suppressed laugh. Lieutenant Frank Delavan shuffled to the front of the room at 8:29, papers in both hands, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was 55 years old and looked every year of it. A man who had perfected the art of looking just busy enough to avoid being asked anything directly. His eyes passed over Denise without stopping. She watched him. She watched all of them. The room settled. Delavan cleared his throat and opened his mouth, and the door opened. Not the side door. The main door. Both panels pushed wide. Deputy Chief Harold Washington walked in first. Full dress uniform. Every button fastened, every bar in place. The kind of entrance that didn't need an announcement, because the uniform made one on its own. Behind him, Chief of Police Elena Vasquez. The room came to attention in a single involuntary movement. Chairs scraping, spines straightening, the low murmur of conversation cutting off like a switch had been thrown. Delavan took a full step back from the podium. Washington walked to the front of the room and stood behind it. He did not rush. He set his hands flat on the surface and looked out at the assembled officers with the patience of a man who had waited a long time for this particular morning. His eyes found Denise in the third row. She gave him the smallest nod. He looked back at the room. "Officers of the 9th Precinct," he said. His voice filled every corner without effort. "I am here this morning to formally introduce your new commanding officer." Penfield's posture shifted, just slightly. "She has 15 years on this force. She holds the Medal of Valor, 3 commendations for outstanding leadership. She was selected by the Chief's office and the Mayor's task force on precinct reform after an 18-month review process." Washington paused. "She is the youngest person ever appointed to captain in this department's history, and she is the first black woman to hold this command." The room was absolutely still. "Effective today," Washington said. "She holds the rank of captain." He stepped to the side, and Denise Harlow Montana stood up from the third row. She didn't hurry. She buttoned the front of her jacket as she rose, smoothed it once with both hands, and walked to the front of the room. Her braids were still damp. The coffee stain was still visible on her collar. She had not changed. She had not cleaned up. She had walked in exactly as they had left her. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed her captain's insignia on the podium. She did not put it on yet. She looked out at the room, at the stunned faces, at the slackened jaws and the wide eyes, and the officers who had been laughing 40 minutes ago and were now sitting in complete, suffocating silence. She looked at Steck. He had gone the color of old chalk. She looked at Penfield. Penfield stared back at her. The easy confidence was gone. The grin was gone. What was left underneath was something she recognized too. The expression of a man who had just realized, fully and completely, that he had made the worst mistake of his career. Good. She wanted him to sit in that for a moment. She wanted every person in that room to sit in it. Then she spoke. "Good morning," she said. "I've already met some of you." The applause didn't come. Nobody stood. Nobody welcomed her. Nobody said a word. The assembly room held its breath. Denise led it. She stood at the front, both hands resting lightly on the podium, and looked out at 43 officers who were staring back at her like they were waiting for the ground to shift beneath their feet. Some of them looked confused. Some looked angry. A few, a very few, looked like something cautious and careful was happening behind their eyes, like they were recalculating. Penfield hadn't moved. He was still in his seat in the front row, jaw tight, eyes fixed on her with an expression that had cured itself into something hard and unreadable. Steck sat beside him, head slightly down, studying the floor. Denise picked up her captain's insignia from the podium. She held it in her palm for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Then she pinned it to her collar, right there, in front of all of them, directly above the coffee stain. She looked back up. "I'm going to keep this short," she said. "I don't believe in long speeches. I believe in work. You'll learn that about me." She paused. Shift assignments remain the same for now. I'll be meeting with each unit over the next week. Until then, do your jobs. Dismissed. Chairs scraped. People moved. The noise of a room coming back to life filled the space around her. Nobody approached her. Nobody welcomed her. That was fine. She hadn't come here to be welcomed. Washington found her in the hallway outside the assembly room, his face tight with the effort of staying professional. "Denise." His voice was low. "What happened in that break room before the briefing? That is a suspendable offense. I can have Penfield pulled off the floor today. Steck too." "Not yet," she said. He stopped walking. "Not yet." He repeated it like he was checking whether he'd heard it right. "Denise." The man poured a drink on his commanding officer. "I know what he did." She kept her voice even. "And I need you to trust me. If I pull them today, Penfield closes ranks. Every officer in this building who is loyal to him, and there are more than a few, goes underground. I spend the next year fighting a war I can't see." She met his eyes. "I need to see the whole structure first. All of it. Then we move." Washington looked at her for a long moment. The worry on his face was real, and she knew it came from the right place. He had fought too hard to get her here. He didn't want to watch it get taken apart in the first week. 72 hours, he said finally. "Then I act, whether you're ready or not. That's all I need." He held her gaze a moment longer. Then he nodded, buttoned his jacket, and walked back toward the exit. She watched him go. Her office was at the end of the second-floor corridor. Small, functional. The previous captain had left behind a dying plant on the windowsill and a motivational poster that was peeling at one corner. She threw the poster in the trash on her way to the desk. She sat down and opened her bag. She pulled out a legal pad and a pen. At the top of the first page, she wrote two names, Penfield, Steck. She underlined them both. Then she sat back and thought. She thought about the break room. She thought about the way the laughter had moved through the room. Easy, rehearsed, like muscle memory. Like a group of people who had done this before and expected no consequences because they had never received any. That kind of comfort didn't come from one incident. That kind of ease was built over time, over repetition, over years of being told in one way or another that the rules applied to everyone except them. She thought about the young woman in the corner. Dark hair, third-year patch on her sleeve, hands in her lap, eyes down, completely silent, while her colleagues fell apart around her. That one had stayed with her. There was a knock at the door. "Come in." The woman who entered was in her mid-50s. Civilian clothes, gray blazer, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She carried a manila folder in both hands and held it slightly in front of her, like an offering. "Captain Montana." Her voice was careful, professional, but her eyes, dark and steady, said something more than professional. They said, "I have been waiting for someone like you for a long time. I'm Angela Reeves, Civilian Administrative Coordinator. I've been with the 9th for 20 years. Denise looked at her. Really looked at her. "Sit down, Ms. Reeves," she said. Angela sat. She placed the folder on the desk and slid it across without being asked. Denise opened it. Personnel files. Use of force reports. Complaint histories going back 6 years. All of it clean, organized, and completely unsolicited. She looked up. "How long have you been keeping these?" she asked. Angela's expression didn't change. "Since the second time I watched it happen, and nobody did anything about it." Denise held her gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the files. "Close the door on your way out," she said. "And Ms. Reeves." Angela paused at the door. "Thank you." Angela nodded once. Then she was gone. Denise worked through the files for 2 hours. The afternoon light moved across her desk in long, slow angles. The precinct hummed around her. Phones, footsteps, the distant sound of the dispatch radio down the hall. Normal sounds. The sounds of a building that believed today had been just another day. She turned a page. She added a third name to her legal pad. Then a fourth. Her pen moved steadily, and she did not look up. Outside her office window, the parking lot was emptying as the day shift ended. She watched the officers filter out in small groups, some of them heading to the same bar they probably went to every Tuesday, laughing about the same things they always laughed about. At the far edge of the lot, she saw Penfield. He was standing beside his car, phone to his ear. His free hand moved as he talked, sharp, emphatic gestures. He wasn't laughing now. He was making calls. She watched him until he got in his car and drove away. Then she looked back down at her legal pad. 6 names? 7? 8. She turned another page. She had work to do. The assembly room filled fast. 8:25 a.m., 5 minutes before the shift briefing. Officers filtered in through the main door in 2s and 3s, still carrying the loose, easy energy of the morning. Coffee cups, half-eaten breakfast sandwiches, conversations that picked up mid-sentence from wherever they'd left off in the hallway. Denise was already seated. 3rd row. Center. She had chosen the seat deliberately. Not hidden in the back, where she could observe without being seen, and not planted in the front, where the choice itself would announce something. Center 3rd row was exactly where an unremarkable new officer would sit on her first day, visible without being conspicuous, present without being a target. She had also chosen not to change her uniform. The coffee stain was still on her collar. Her braids were still slightly damp at the ends. She had blotted what she could in the restroom, straightened what she could in her office, and made a deliberate decision to walk into this room exactly as Dale Penfield had left her. Let them see it. Let every person in this room see exactly what had happened this morning, and who had been standing in that break room when it did. Officers settled into seats around her. A few glanced at her, new face, unfamiliar uniform, and looked away. Nobody spoke to her. Nobody asked her name. That was fine. Penfield came in at 8:27. He had Steck at his shoulder, the way he always seemed to, the two of them moving through the room with the easy ownership of men who believed the space belonged to them. Penfield was talking, low and relaxed, and Steck was nodding along with a grin that hadn't fully faded from the morning. Penfield scanned the room as he entered. Force of habit, probably. The king checking his kingdom. His eyes found her in the 3rd row. Something moved across his face. Fast, barely there, gone before it fully formed. He held her gaze for exactly 1 second. Then he looked away, dropped into a seat in the front row, and leaned back like he owned the chair. Steck settled beside him. He leaned over and said something quiet into Penfield's ear. Penfield's shoulders moved once with a short, suppressed laugh. Denise watched them and said nothing. Lieutenant Frank Delavan reached the front of the room at 8:29, papers in both hands, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He set his papers on the podium, straightened them unnecessarily, and cleared his throat. He was stalling. She could see it from the 3rd row. His eyes moved around the room in the practiced pattern of a man who had learned, over many years, how to look busy enough to avoid being looked at directly. His gaze passed over her without stopping. She filed that away. 8:30. Delavan opened his mouth. The main door opened, both panels, wide. The room reacted before anyone had processed what they were seeing. A collective, involuntary straightening, like a current had passed through every spine in the room simultaneously. Chairs scraped back. Feet found the floor. Conversations died in the middle of words. Deputy Chief Harold Washington walked in first. Full-dress uniform. Every button fastened, every crease sharp, every bar and medal exactly where it belonged. He was 61 years old, and he walked like a man who had spent those years earning the right to enter a room this way. He didn't look around. He walked directly to the front, and the crowd parted for him without thinking about it. Behind him, Chief of Police Elena Vasquez, composed, direct, her eyes moving over the room with the calm assessment of someone who had already read every report that mattered. Delavan stepped back from the podium so fast he nearly knocked his papers to the floor. Washington took the podium. He set both hands flat on the surface and looked out at the room. He didn't rush. He let the silence do its work, let it build and settle, and pressed down on every person in every chair, until the room was so quiet that the hum of the overhead lights was audible. Then he spoke. Officers of the 9th Precinct. His voice was measured, unhurried, the voice of a man who had waited a long time for this particular morning and intended to take every second of it. I am here to formally introduce your new commanding officer. Denise felt the room shift, not physically, but something in the atmosphere changed, the way air changes before a storm. A low murmur moved through the back rows. Penfield's posture changed, just slightly, just a degree of tension in the shoulders that hadn't been there before. She has 15 years on this force, Washington continued. She holds the Medal of Valor, 3 commendations for outstanding leadership. She was selected by the Chief's office and the Mayor's task force on precinct reform after an 18-month review. He paused, and in that pause the room held its breath. She is the youngest person ever appointed to captain in this department's history, and she is the first black woman to hold this command. Nobody moved. Effective today, Washington said, she holds the rank of captain. He stepped to the side, and Denise Harlow Montana stood up from the 3rd row. She rose without hurry. She smoothed the front of her jacket with both hands. She walked to the front of the room at an even pace, and every eye in the building followed her. The coffee stain was visible on her collar. Her braids still carried the faint evidence of the morning. She had not cleaned up. She had not changed. She walked to the front of the room exactly as Dale Penfield had left her, and she stood behind the podium and looked out at all of them. She looked at Steck first. He had gone the color of old chalk. His mouth was slightly open. The grin was completely gone. She looked at Delavan. He was staring at his papers like they might save him. Then she looked at Penfield. Penfield stared back. The ease was gone. The ownership was gone. The performed confidence that had filled every corner of the break room that morning had drained out of his face and left something behind that was smaller and harder and much less certain. She held his gaze. She reached into her jacket pocket and placed her captain's insignia on the podium. She did not put it on yet. She let it sit there, visible to every person in the room, and let the silence stretch another full second. Then she pinned it to her collar, slowly, deliberately, right above the coffee stain he had put there. She looked back up. "Good morning," she said. "I've already met some of you." The room stayed silent. Not the comfortable silence of a group of people waiting politely. The airless, pressing silence of 43 people who had just understood, all at once and with complete clarity, exactly what kind of morning this had been and exactly what kind of captain was standing at the front of their precinct. Denise let it sit. Then she spoke again, her voice even and unhurried. "I don't believe in long speeches. I believe in work." She looked out at the room, all of it, every face, every row. "You'll learn that about me. Shift assignments remain unchanged. I'll be meeting with each unit individually over the next week. Until then," she gathered her papers from the podium with one clean motion, "do your jobs." She stepped back. Dismissed. Washington was waiting for her in the hallway. He had positioned himself just outside the assembly room doors, far enough from the dispersing officers to have a private conversation, close enough that she didn't have to go looking for him. Chief Vasquez had already moved toward the exit, exchanging brief words with Delavan on her way out. Delavan nodded along with the careful attentiveness of a man trying to look like he hadn't just been blindsided. Washington watched Denise approach and waited until the hallway had thinned before he spoke. "I want Penfield pulled off the floor today," he said quietly. "Him and Steck both. What happened in that break room this morning is a suspendable offense. Minimum." "Not yet." His jaw tightened. "Denise?" "Not yet, Harold." She kept her voice low and her eyes forward, watching the last few officers filter out of the assembly room. "If I suspend them today, every officer in this building who owes Penfield a favor, and there are more than a few, goes quiet, goes careful. I lose my window. Your window." He said it slowly, like he was testing the weight of it. "To see the whole machine." She turned and looked at him directly. "Right now, they don't know what I know or how much I've already seen. That's an advantage I only have once. The moment I move on Penfield, it's gone." Washington looked at her for a long moment. The worry on his face was genuine. She had known him long enough to read every version of it, and this was the version that meant he understood her reasoning and hated it anyway. 72 hours, he said. "After that, I act, with or without your timing. That's all I need." He held her gaze another beat. Then he nodded once, buttoned his jacket, and walked toward the exit without looking back. She watched him go. Then she turned and headed upstairs. Her office was on the second floor, end of the corridor, last door on the left. It was smaller than she'd expected, one window facing the parking lot, a desk that had seen better decades. The previous captain had left behind a dying plant on the windowsill, a motivational poster peeling at one corner, and a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest boss," that she suspected had been left as a joke. She threw the poster in the trash. She watered the plant. She left the mug. She sat down, opened her bag, and pulled out the legal pad she'd started that morning. 8 names. She looked at the top 2, underlined. Then she got to work. Angela Reeves knocked at 10:20. She entered carrying a second folder, thicker than the first, rubber-banded twice, and set it on the desk with the same quiet efficiency she'd shown earlier. Use of force supplementals, overtime logs cross-referenced against incident reports, a handwritten index on the inside cover, dated and organized by year. 20 years of invisible, meticulous documentation. Denise paged through it slowly while Angela sat across from her, hands folded, waiting. Not nervous, patient. The patience of a woman who had kept these files for years, with no guarantee that anyone worthy would ever sit in this chair to receive them. "These names that keep appearing," Denise said, without looking up. "The officers who left. Were complaints ever filed?" 3 of them filed complaints, Angela said. All 3 were resolved internally. 2 of the officers resigned within 60 days of the resolution. The 3rd transferred to another precinct and requested a record seal. Denise looked up, and nobody connected the pattern. Angela's expression was very still. Nobody who had the authority to act on it was looking. Denise held her gaze. Then she looked back down at the file. "Close the door on your way out," she said. "And Ms. Reeves, these stay between us until I say otherwise." "They've stayed between me and a filing cabinet for 6 years, Angela said. "A few more days is nothing." The afternoon moved steadily. Denise worked through files, built timelines, and mapped connections with the focused quiet of someone who had learned a long time ago that the most powerful thing you could do in a room that underestimated you was to prepare better than anyone expected. By 4 o'clock, she had the bones of something, not enough to act on. but enough to understand the shape of what she was dealing with. She was reaching for her coffee when her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Captain Montana? The voice was smooth and professional. My name is Richard Gale. I'm an attorney representing Officer Gary Steck. She set her coffee down. I'm calling as a professional courtesy, Gale continued, to inform you that my client has filed a formal complaint with the department alleging harassment and intimidation by a superior officer. Specifically, that you approached him in an aggressive manner in the break room this morning, demanded his badge information in a threatening tone, and created a hostile work environment. The room was very quiet. The police union, Gale added, has agreed to represent Officer Steck in this matter. Denise said nothing for a moment. She looked out the window at the parking lot below. The late afternoon light was long and flat across the asphalt. I see, she said. I wanted you to be aware before this moved to the next stage, Gale said. Professionally courteous, carefully neutral, doing the job he had been paid to do. Thank you for the call, Mr. Gale. She kept her voice completely level. Have a good evening. She hung up. She sat very still for a moment. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty. The day shift was gone. The building had settled into the quieter rhythms of evening. At the far end of the lot, one car remained. Penfield's. The lights inside were still on. She could see the faint glow of his office window reflected in the windshield. He had been planning this before she'd even finished the briefing. Probably before the briefing had even started. The attorney's number had been dialed before she'd pinned her insignia to her collar. She picked up her pen. She looked down at her legal pad. She turned to a fresh page and wrote one word at the top. Timeline. Then she started writing. The Westfield Gazette hit the precinct at 7:48 a.m. Not the print edition. Nobody waited for print anymore. It was a link forwarded through the precinct's unofficial group chat, the one Denise wasn't on, the one nobody had mentioned to her. And by the time she pulled into the parking lot on day 2, it had already been read by every officer on the morning shift. She found out from Angela. Angela was waiting outside her office door when Denise reached the second floor. Phone in hand, her expression carrying the particular tightness of someone delivering bad news they had hoped would not exist. It's up, Angela said simply. She held out her phone. Denise took it and read. Westfield Gazette. Breaking. New captain's first day ends in misconduct allegation. The Westfield Police Department's newly appointed 9th Precinct captain is facing questions this morning after sources close to the department allege an altercation occurred on her first day involving a subordinate officer. While details remain unclear, multiple sources indicate the new captain, appointed yesterday amid the city's ongoing precinct reform initiative, engaged in conduct that has prompted a formal union complaint. Department officials declined to comment. The officer involved is being represented by the police union. Denise read it twice. Then she handed the phone back to Angela. How long has it been up? Since 6:45 this morning. She nodded slowly. 45 minutes before she'd even arrived. Whoever had called the Gazette had done it last night, probably before Penfield's car had fully left the parking lot. Thank you, Ms. Reeves. She unlocked her office, went inside, and closed the door. She had exactly 40 minutes before the morning shift briefing. She used them. She called Washington first. He had already seen it. His voice had the compressed, controlled quality of a man managing serious anger in a professional context. It's deliberately vague, she said. No specifics, because they don't want specifics on record yet. They just want the headline sitting there. They want the first version of this story to be theirs. It's working, Washington said. I've already had 2 calls from the commissioner's office. What did you tell them? That I have full confidence in Captain Montana, and that the department will be conducting its own review of yesterday's events. A pause. Which is true. and which I intend to pursue aggressively the moment you give me the word." "Not yet," she said. A longer pause this time. "Denise, I know. I hear you. But if we respond to this article directly, we're playing their game on their timetable. I'm not doing that." She looked out her window at the parking lot below. Officers were arriving for the morning shift, moving in familiar clusters. Easy, comfortable. Like yesterday had been just another day. Let them think it's working. Washington exhaled. 72 hours. We said 72 hours. And I mean it. Penfield was already on the floor when she came downstairs. He was different today. She clocked it immediately. Yesterday's loose, reckless energy, the grinning performance of a man who believed he was untouchable, had been replaced by something more controlled, more careful. He moved through the morning shift with deliberate professionalism, collegial, helpful, visible. He held doors. He answered questions. He laughed at appropriate moments without overdoing it. He was building a paper trail, in real time, right in front of her. She watched him without watching him, the way she had learned to observe rooms without appearing to observe them, and understood exactly what he was doing. Every pleasant interaction this morning was a future witness statement. Every collegial gesture was evidence of a man who had nothing to hide. His circle followed his lead. Steck had dialed himself back to a careful neutrality, speaking to her once in the hallway. A brief, bland morning that contained nothing actionable and everything intentional. Two other officers from the break room were similarly transformed, professional, unremarkable, giving her nothing. The smirks were still there. They were just smaller now, turned inward. She gave no indication that she noticed any of it. Harv Green arrived at 10 o'clock. Union representative. 50-something. Well-dressed in the way of a man who wanted to appear reasonable while charging by the hour. He had the practiced ease of someone who had sat across from police captains many times and had learned exactly how much of that ease to show. He set up in the conference room and sent word through Delavan, not through Denise's office directly, she noted, through Delavan, that he was available at her convenience. She made him wait 20 minutes. Then she went in. Her department-appointed attorney, a compact and precise woman named Sandra Oscar, was already seated when Denise arrived. Green sat across from them with a thin folder and an expression of practiced regret. "Captain Montana." He extended his hand. "Thank you for making the time." She shook it, said nothing. He opened the folder. He walked through Steck's complaint with the careful neutrality of a man presenting a weather report. No editorializing, no visible agenda. Just facts, he implied. Just process. Steck alleged that Denise had approached him aggressively, following what he characterized as an accidental interaction in the break room, that she had demanded his badge information in a threatening manner, that she had created a hostile and intimidating environment. Denise listened without expression. When Green finished, he folded his hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped to the register of a man offering a private kindness. "I want to be straightforward with you, Captain, because I think that serves everyone better." He paused. "This complaint has legs. The Union intends to pursue it fully. However," another pause, weighted and deliberate, "these things don't always have to become public battles. There are paths that serve everyone's interests. Quiet paths." His eyes met hers. If the department were willing to consider a fresh start arrangement, moving forward without pursuing any disciplinary action related to yesterday's events, I believe we could find a resolution that keeps this out of the press and out of the formal record. The room was quiet. Sandra Oscar made a small note on her legal pad. Denise looked at Green for a long moment. She looked at the folder. She looked at his folded hands and his reasonable expression and the careful, practiced machinery of a man who had made offers like this one many times before and had almost always gotten what he wanted. "I appreciate your directness, Mr. Green," she said. He nodded, beginning to settle. "My answer is no." His expression didn't break, but something behind it shifted. A faint recalibration, like a dial turning one click. "I see," he said. "I think we're done for today." She pushed her chair back. "Sandra will be your point of contact going forward." She stood, buttoned her jacket, and walked out of the conference room without looking back. In the hallway, Angela Reeves was at her desk, eyes on her screen, expression neutral. As Denise passed, Angela slid a fresh folder to the edge of the desk without looking up. Denise picked it up without breaking stride. She had work to do. The maintenance request was filed on a Thursday. Denise had been appointed on a Friday. She had started on Tuesday. She sat with that fact for a long moment before she wrote it down. It had started with a simple request. Standard procedure for building an internal disciplinary case. She needed the break room surveillance footage from Tuesday morning. Time-stamped, unedited, exactly as recorded. She submitted the formal request through Delevingne's office at 9 a.m. on day 2, copied Sandra Oscar, and expected a response by end of day. Delevingne came to her office at 2:15 in the afternoon. He knocked twice, entered without being invited, and stood just inside the doorway with the careful posture of a man who had rehearsed what he was about to say. "About your footage request." He cleared his throat. "The break room camera. It's been non-operational for about 6 months." Denise looked up from her desk. 6 months. Give or take. He shifted his weight. "Maintenance backlog. It happens. I'll need the maintenance records." Something moved across his face. Brief, controlled, gone quickly. "Of course. I'll have them pulled. Today, please." He nodded and left. She watched the door close behind him and wrote 2 words on her legal pad. Camera. Delevingne. The maintenance records arrived at 4:30. Incomplete. 3 pages where there should have been at least 8, based on the department's standard equipment logging protocol. The submission date of the original repair request was missing entirely. The technician's sign-off was blank. The follow-up inspection record didn't exist. She requested the originals from the facility's log. She was told, through Delevingne's assistant, that the facility's log for that period was being located. She requested the IT department's equipment status report. She received a 2-line email informing her that the camera had been flagged as non-operational and that no repair timeline had been established. She printed everything. She put it in a folder, she labeled the folder with a date, and set it aside. Then she started the interviews. She began with the officers she assessed as least loyal to Penfield. Newer transfers. Officers whose personnel files showed no particular connection to his circle. She called them in one by one, kept it informal, framed it as standard onboarding conversations. Most were evasive, not hostile, careful. There was a difference. Hostile meant anger, and anger meant something to work with. Careful meant they had already done a calculation and decided that saying nothing was safer than saying anything. One officer, 6-year veteran, 2 commendations, transfer from the 4th Precinct 18 months ago, started to say something useful and then stopped himself mid-sentence and looked at his hands. He finished the interview without giving her anything she could use. She thanked him. She wrote his name down. 2 others were openly resistant. Short answers, flat eyes, the body language of men performing compliance while communicating something else entirely. She thanked them too. She wrote their names down. Priya Nadler knocked at 4:45. She hadn't been called. She had come on her own. Denise looked up when she entered and said nothing, just gestured to the chair across the desk and waited while Priya closed the door and sat down. The young officer perched on the edge of the seat with her hands pressed flat against her thighs. She was 29 years old, and she looked, in this moment, younger than that. "I was in the break room," Priya said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. "Tuesday morning, I was there the whole time." "I know," Denise said. Priya looked up. Something in her expression shifted. She had expected to have to argue for her own relevance, and not having to seem to catch her off balance. "I didn't laugh," she said. Then, quieter. "But I didn't do anything either. I just sat there." She stopped. Started again. "I've been sitting there for 3 years." The room was quiet for a moment. "I know that too," Denise said. Priya looked at her hands. "I want to give a statement. A formal one. Everything I saw." She paused. "I know what that means. I know what Penfield does to people who—" She stopped herself, swallowed. "I know what it costs." "It costs something," Denise said honestly. "I won't tell you it doesn't." Priya nodded slowly, like she had already made the decision and just needed to hear that it was real. Denise slid a formal statement form across the desk. Priya picked up the pen. Her hand was trembling. Not enough to stop her, just enough to be visible. She pressed the pen to the paper and signed her name with the careful deliberateness of someone doing something they cannot undo. When she was done, she set the pen down and exhaled. "Thank you," Denise said. Priya nodded. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the frame. "There are others," she said, without turning around. "Officers who saw things, not just Tuesday, before Tuesday." A beat. "They're scared, but they're there." Then she was gone. Denise looked at the signed statement for a moment. Then she put it in the folder with the maintenance records. She picked up her phone and called Angela. "The camera maintenance request," she said when Angela answered. "I need the original submission record, not the copy DeLavin sent me, the original." A brief pause. "I have it," Angela said. "I've had it since Wednesday morning. I was waiting to see what they sent you first." "Bring it up." Angela arrived 7 minutes later with a single printed page. She placed it on the desk face up and tapped it once with one finger before she left. Denise looked at it. The original maintenance request had a submission date. It had a requester name. It had a signature. The request had been filed on a Thursday, 2 days before Denise's appointment had been publicly announced. 5 days before her first day. The signature at the bottom belonged to Sergeant Dale Penfield. Denise sat back in her chair. The camera hadn't broken down. It had been turned off. On purpose. By a man who had known she was coming, and had spent the days before her arrival, making sure there would be no record of what he planned to do when she arrived. She looked out the window. The parking lot was dark now. Most of the cars were gone. She picked up her pen. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote one word at the top. Premeditated. Then she underlined it. Twice. She found Tracy Barry on a Thursday afternoon. Not through the official personnel system. Those records had been sealed, exactly as Angela had described. She found her through a 3-year-old community policing newsletter archived on the department's public website. A small photograph. A caption. Officer Tracy Barry accepts the 9th Precinct's Community Service Award. She was smiling in the photo. Full uniform, medal in hand, the kind of smile that meant she had earned it and knew it. 8 months after that photo was taken, she had resigned. Day 3 started early. Denise was at her desk by 6:15, working through the last of Angela's cross-referenced files before the building filled up. The pattern she had begun mapping on day 2 was sharpening into something undeniable. 6 officers in 5 years. Not a coincidence. Not a turnover statistic. A pattern with a consistent shape. A manufactured complaint, a union complaint filed in response to any pushback, a strategic leak to a local press contact, and then silence. The officer either left quietly or transferred out. The files got sealed, or sanitized. The precinct moved on. Disproportionately, women. Disproportionately, officers of color. Every single time. She wrote all 6 names in a column on her legal pad. Next to each name, she wrote the year they left, the nature of the complaint filed against them, and the name that appeared, directly or indirectly, in every single case. Penfield. She looked at the column for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. Tracy Berry answered on the 3rd ring. Denise identified herself fully. Name, rank, precinct. She didn't soften it or ease into it. She had learned a long time ago that people who had been burned by institutions needed to know exactly who they were talking to before they decided whether to keep talking. There was a long pause after Denise finished speaking. "I heard they appointed someone new," Tracy said finally. Her voice was measured. Not cold, but careful. The voice of a woman who had learned to be careful. "I didn't know it was you." "I'd like to meet," Denise said. "Off the record. Not at the precinct." Another pause, shorter this time. "There's a coffee shop on Mercer Street," Tracy said. "I can be there at 2. She was already seated when Denise arrived. Tracy Berry was 34 years old. She was wearing a gray blazer and reading glasses she pushed up on her head when Denise sat down across from her. She looked like what she was, a sharp, composed woman who had rebuilt herself after something had tried to knock her flat. She worked as a paralegal now, she said. Family law. She liked it. She talked about her job for exactly 2 minutes before she stopped and looked at Denise directly. "You're not here to talk about my job," she said. "No," Denise said. "I'm not." She told Tracy what she had found in Angela's files. Not everything, enough. The pattern, the names, the timeline. Tracy listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes did. A slow, controlled recognition, like watching someone piece together a picture they had been carrying in fragments for years. When Denise finished, the table was quiet for a moment. "His name came up in my case," Tracy said. "Penfield." Not directly in the official complaint. They were smarter than that. But he was there. He was always there. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "My first week at the 9th, my locker got vandalized. My reports kept getting misfiled. I'd get called to scenes and find out when I got there that the call had been reassigned. Small things. Nothing you could point to directly." Her jaw tightened. "Until it wasn't small anymore." "What happened?" "I filed a complaint. Against Steck. He made a comment in front of witnesses that I couldn't let go. 2 days later, I had a union complaint filed against me. Conduct unbecoming. Insubordination." She almost laughed. Almost. "The union rep told me it could go away. Told me to start fresh. Said if I dropped my complaint and kept my head down, everything would settle." "Did you?" "No." Her voice was flat. "So it didn't settle. It got worse. Something got leaked to a reporter. I don't know what. I never found out exactly. And suddenly there were questions about my conduct floating around the precinct that had nothing to do with anything I had actually done." She paused. "I held on for 4 more months. And then I didn't have anything left to hold on with." The coffee shop was quiet around them. Soft music, the sound of an espresso machine somewhere behind the counter. "I'm sorry," Denise said. Tracy looked at her. "Don't be sorry," she said. "Do something." She reached into her bag and pulled out a large envelope. She set it on the table between them. "I kept everything," she said. "Every email, every text. Every document I was ever handed in that building. I've had it in a box under my bed for 3 years because I didn't know what else to do with it." She pushed the envelope across the table. "I didn't know who to give it to." Denise looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Tracy. "Can I photograph these? You can take the originals." Tracy's voice was steady now, steadier than it had been when they sat down. "I have copies." Denise took the envelope. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of 3 years inside it. "I'm going to need you to be willing to talk again," she said. "Formally, when the time comes." Tracy was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the street outside, at the ordinary afternoon moving past, people going places, the world doing what it did. "Is it going to matter?" she asked. Not bitterly, genuinely. "Yes," Denise said. "It's going to matter." Tracy turned back and looked at her for a long time, reading her, measuring her the way a person measures someone after they have been lied to by enough people to know the difference. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. "Then yes," she said quietly, "when the time comes." Denise drove back to the precinct as the sun dropped behind the buildings on the west side of Mercer Street. The envelope was on the passenger seat beside her. She kept one hand on the wheel and let the other rest on top of it. A machine. That was what she had called it in her head 2 days ago. A machine for grinding people down. She had the pieces now. She had the pattern, the documentation, the testimony, and the evidence of premeditation. She had a woman who had carried a box under her bed for 3 years, waiting for someone to come along who was worth trusting with it. She had work to do. She pulled into the precinct parking lot and sat for a moment. Then she picked up the envelope, got out of the car, and went inside. Washington made the call at 8 a.m. on day 4. Denise was at her desk when he phoned, the Tracy Berry envelope open in front of her. Documents spread in careful rows across the surface. She had been there since 6. She listened while he walked her through what he had done, taken her preliminary findings, Angela's cross-referenced files, and the camera sabotage documentation directly to the city's Office of Professional Standards, bypassing the union channel entirely. "The OPS has agreed to open a formal investigation," he said, "effective immediately. The union complaint against you is placed on administrative hold pending their review." She set her pen down. "How long is the hold?" "Open-ended. Until the OPS completes its preliminary review. Could be 2 weeks. Could be more." A pause. "Denise, this is significant. The union complaint was their primary weapon. Without it, Green has nothing to pressure you with." She knew he was right. The complaint had been the blade held to her throat, the threat of a public, messy disciplinary process designed to consume her attention, drain her credibility, and keep her permanently on the defensive. With it on hold, that pressure lifted. For now. "Thank you, Harold," she said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Thank me when it's done." She hung up and sat quietly for a moment. Outside her window, the morning shift was arriving. Cars pulling in, doors opening and closing, the ordinary sounds of a building coming to life. She allowed herself one full breath of something that felt, cautiously, like relief. Then she picked her pen back up. She approved Priya Nadler's commendation at 10 o'clock. It was a community outreach recognition. Priya had organized a youth engagement program in the neighborhood served by the 9th, working weekends without extra pay for 3 months. The commendation had been sitting in a pending file, unsigned by the previous captain, for 6 weeks. Denise signed it, had Angela process it officially, and sent a copy to Priya's personnel file with a formal note of acknowledgement. Standard procedure. Completely by the book. She did it in front of the full administrative office, where 3 officers happened to be handling paperwork at the time. Within an hour, word had moved through the building the way word always moved through precincts. Faster than email, quieter than announcement. Priya Nadler had been recognized, officially, by the new captain. It was a small thing, but small things had weight in buildings like this one. Small things told people which way the wind was blowing. The shift in the building was subtle, the kind of thing you felt before you could name it. By afternoon, two officers who had given her nothing in her onboarding interviews made eye contact in the hallway. Not a conversation, not an overture, just the simple acknowledgement of a gaze held for a half-second longer than avoidance required. A third officer, the 6-year veteran who had stopped himself mid-sentence 2 days ago, paused outside her open office door on his way past, looked in, and seemed to make a small internal decision before continuing down the hall. He didn't come in, but he had slowed down. He would come in eventually. She noted all of it, without showing that she noted it. Angela smiled for the first time since Denise had arrived. It was small and brief, and she covered it quickly with her professional expression, but it was there. Denise caught it from across the room and said nothing. Steck looked worried. She noticed it mid-afternoon, watching him from her office window as he crossed the parking lot below. The loose, easy confidence of Tuesday morning was gone. His shoulders carried a tension that hadn't been there before, and he moved with the slightly contracted body language of a man who had stopped feeling certain about where he stood. He took his phone out twice, looked at the screen, and put it away without making a call. Penfield, when she passed him in the East Corridor at 3 o'clock, looked his age for the first time. The careful performance of collegiality that he had maintained since Wednesday morning was still intact. He nodded when she passed, the minimum required courtesy, but his eyes were different. Flat where they had been sharp, working hard at something. She nodded back and kept walking. In her office, she closed the door and sat down. She let herself feel it. The real, physical sensation of a situation beginning to turn. 15 years on the force had taught her what momentum felt like when it shifted. When cases that had been grinding against you started grinding the other way. She let herself feel it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she opened the next file. Because she also knew, 15 years had taught her this too, that the moment you allowed yourself to believe the hard part was over was almost always the moment it got worse. She kept her eyes on the page. She kept her pen moving. She did not stop watching. Her phone rang at 6:47 p.m. She was still at her desk. The building had quieted around her, the evening shift settling into its own rhythms, the daytime noise reduced to the distant hum of dispatch and the occasional footstep in the corridor. Washington again. She answered. "It's solid," he said, and she could hear the careful satisfaction in his voice. The tone of a man who had been fighting uphill for a long time and could feel the ground beginning to level. "The OPS preliminary review is going well. Your documentation is clean, and the camera evidence is—" "Denise, the camera evidence is damning. Premeditation changes everything. They know it. Green knows it. I've heard through the right channels that the Union is reassessing their position on Steck." She looked out her window. The parking lot was mostly empty. One light at the far end flickered once and held. "Good," she said. "How are you holding up?" She considered the question genuinely, the way she rarely allowed herself to. 15 years of being the first and the only had trained her to answer that question on autopilot. Fine, focused, moving forward. The professional armor, worn so long it had started to feel like skin. Tonight, it felt like what it was. Armor. With a person inside it who had been wearing it for a very long time. "I'm good," she said. And then, because it was Washington, and he would know the difference, "I'm tired. But I'm good." "Almost there," he said quietly. "Almost," she agreed. She hung up. She gathered her files into their folders and stacked them in their order on the corner of her desk. She stood, put on her jacket, and looked around her office. The neat desk, the watered plant on the windowsill that was looking, she thought, marginally less dead than it had on Tuesday. Small progress, but real. She turned off the light and went home. For the first time since Tuesday morning, she slept. Her phone rang at 6:12 a.m. She was 20 minutes from the precinct, coffee in the cup holder, the early morning radio talking about traffic she wasn't in yet. She answered on the second ring. Washington. His voice had none of yesterday's careful satisfaction. It was compressed and tight, the way it got when something had gone wrong, and he was already 3 steps into managing it. "Pull over," he said. She pulled into a gas station lot and put the car in park. "Talk to me. The Gazette has a new story. It went up 11 minutes ago." She heard papers moving on his end. The headline is, and I'm reading this exactly, "New Captain digs up old cases in witch hunt against veteran officers." The gas station lot was quiet around her. A man was filling his tank 2 pumps over, not looking at anything in particular. "What's in it?" she asked. "Your preliminary personnel review, the pattern documentation, the names of the officers who left the 9th. A pause that felt like he was choosing his next words carefully. "Tracy Berry is mentioned by name." Denise closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "It characterizes your investigation as a personal vendetta," Washington continued. "Quotes multiple anonymous sources, all described as veteran officers at the 9th, calling you a wrecking ball. Says you're more focused on settling scores than running a precinct." He stopped. "It's thorough. Whoever gave them this had access to your review documentation." "Someone in the OPS," she said. "Or someone who was told about the OPS review by someone in the OPS." He let that sit for a moment. "Denise, there's more." She already knew. She could feel it coming the way you feel weather changing. Tracy's employer received an anonymous call this morning. Early, before 7. Whoever called suggested that her resignation from the department was conduct-related. His voice was careful, controlled. "Her employer is asking questions." The man at the pump 2 spaces over finished filling his tank, replaced the nozzle, and drove away. The lot went quiet. "She's going to pull back," Denise said. "She already called me. She's scared, Denise. She has a job. She has a life she rebuilt. I'll call her." "There's one more thing." She waited. Delavan filed a statement with the OPS this morning. Nominally neutral. He was careful about the language, but it's laced. He questions the timeline of your break room account. He notes that he personally observed nothing unusual in the precinct that morning. He describes Penfield as a brief pause, a professional and well-regarded officer with an exemplary record of community engagement. The gas station lot, the flickering light above the pump, the smell of fuel and early morning, and the particular quiet of a world that didn't know what was happening inside her car. "He made his choice," she said. "He did." She sat with it all for a moment. The story. Tracy. Delavan. 3 blows delivered before 7 a.m., coordinated with the precision of people who had done this before and knew exactly which order to land them in. "I'm going into the precinct," she said. "Denise, I'm going in. I'll call you this afternoon." She hung up. She sat in the lot for another 30 seconds. She looked at her hands on the steering wheel. Steady, both of them. And she thought about what Tracy had said at the coffee shop. "Don't be sorry. Do something." She put the car in drive and pulled back onto the road. The precinct was already buzzing when she arrived. Not loudly. The 9th didn't buzz loudly when something was going in Penfield's favor. It buzzed the way a room buzzes when everyone knows something and nobody is saying it out loud. Low, satisfied energy, moving in the gaps between conversations, living in the looks exchanged across the room when she walked through the door. She walked through it without breaking stride. Upstairs, she closed her office door and called Tracy. It rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice was different from yesterday. The steady, measured quality was still there, but underneath it was something frayed. "I heard," Denise said. "They called my boss." Tracy's voice was tight. "They called him before 7 in the morning, Denise." "Before 7. Do you know what my boss asked me this morning?" He asked me if there was anything about my resignation that he should know about. Like I had done something. She stopped. I have clients. I have a reputation I spent 3 years building from nothing. I know. I don't know if I can. Tracy. Denise kept her voice even. I need you to hear me. What they just did, calling your employer, that is witness intimidation. That is a federal offense. The moment I file it with the DOJ contact I have been building toward, you become a protected whistleblower under federal statute. They cannot touch your job. They cannot touch your record. They cannot touch anything. Silence. You told me to do something, Denise said. I'm doing it, but I need you to hold on a little longer. The silence stretched. Long enough that Denise found herself watching the second hand on her desk clock move through a full rotation. How much longer? Tracy asked. Days, not weeks. Another pause. Shorter. Okay, Tracy said quietly. Okay. She worked through the morning behind a closed door. At 2 o'clock, Sandra Oscar arrived to brief her on the union's response to the OPS hold. At 3, Angela brought coffee and a fresh folder, without being asked, and left without a word. At 4:30, Denise leaned back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. She was furious. She had kept it managed all day, professional, contained, functional, but it was there, and it was real, and it deserved to be. Not at the leak, not at the article, not even at Delevingne's careful betrayal. At the ease of it. The complete and total institutional ease with which a man like Penfield could pick up a phone and dismantle someone's life before breakfast. She thought about Tracy's voice, frayed at the edges after 3 years of rebuilding. She thought about the 6 names in her column. She thought about Priya's shaking hands, signing a statement she couldn't unsign. She picked up her phone and called Washington. They went after Tracy, she said. A long pause. Then we stopped playing their game, Washington said. His voice was different now. Not compressed, not managed. Decided. Tell me what you need. Denise looked down at her legal pad. At the 3 handwritten pages she had been building since 6 a.m. 3 fronts. 3 simultaneous moves. Coordinated. Documented. And federal. I need 1 more day to get everything in place, she said. And then I need you to make a call to your DOJ contact. Done, he said immediately. What else? That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. She hung up. She turned to a fresh page on her legal pad. At the top she wrote 3 words. 3 fronts. Tomorrow. Then she picked up her pen, and she didn't put it down again until the page was full. She didn't go home? Not really. She drove to her apartment, showered, changed, ate something she didn't taste standing over the kitchen sink, and was back in her car by 11:15 p.m. She sat in the parking lot of the 9th Precinct with the engine off and the windows down, the night air coming in slow and warm, and she worked through the 3 pages on her legal pad until she had every sequence mapped and every dependency accounted for. She was at her desk by 4:30 a.m. Day 6 started before the building knew it had started. She made the first call at 5 a.m. Washington answered on the second ring. She had known he would. He had told her to call whenever she was ready. And Harold Washington was not a man who said things he didn't mean. I'm ready, she said. Talk to me. She walked him through all 3 fronts, sequenced and timed. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a brief silence. Not uncertainty. She knew him well enough to know the difference, but the silence of a man locking something into place. The DOJ contact is Marcus Warper, he said. Civil Rights Division. He's been waiting for a reason to move on the 9th for 2 years. Your documentation is going to be that reason. A pause. I'll call him at 8 when his office opens. You'll hear from him directly. Thank you. Don't thank me. he said, for the second time since this had started. "Thank me when it's done." She hung up and moved to the second front. Angela arrived at 7:55. Denise heard her key in the downstairs lock, heard her footsteps on the stairs, and was at her office door before Angela reached the top. Angela looked at her, took in the fact that she was already there, already dressed, already 3 hours into the day, and said nothing about any of it. She simply set her bag down and looked at Denise with the steady, clear attention of a woman who had been waiting 20 years for a morning like this one. "The equipment logs," Denise said. "Everything you have on the camera maintenance request. The original submission form. Penfield's signature. The timeline showing the request was filed before my appointment was publicly announced. Already printed and tabbed," Angela said. She opened her bag and produced a folder. Clean, organized, indexed. Of course it was. Denise took it and looked through it quickly. Every page was there, every date aligned. The original maintenance request, time-stamped and signed, sitting on top like a question that had already answered itself. She looked up. "This goes to the OPS today, formally submitted as evidence of premeditation. I need you to be the submitting witness." Angela didn't hesitate. "Tell me where and when." "Sandra Oscar's office at noon. She'll walk you through the formal process." Angela nodded once. Then she sat down at her desk, straightened her keyboard, and began her morning as though what had just happened was simply the next item on a list she had been keeping for a very long time. Marcus Warper called at 8:23. His voice was direct and unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent years inside federal bureaucracy without letting it slow him down. "Deputy Chief Washington tells me you have documentation of a systematic pattern of targeted harassment and forced attrition going back 6 years, he said. "Walk me through it." She did. 15 minutes, no detours, no unnecessary qualifications. The 6 officers, the pattern, the union complaint machinery, the camera sabotage, Tracy Barry, the witness intimidation, the call to Tracy's employer before 7 a.m. on day 5. When she finished, Warper was quiet for a moment. "The Westfield PD has been on our passive monitoring list since 2019, he said. A civil rights complaint was filed and subsequently went cold when the complainant withdrew. We always believed the withdrawal was coerced." A pause. "What you're describing activates that prior complaint and adds 6 years of additional pattern evidence. That's not an internal disciplinary matter anymore, Captain Montana. That's a federal civil rights investigation." She felt something settle in her chest, solid and permanent. "I'll need your full documentation package," Warper continued. "I'll also need a formal interview. And the witness, Tracy Barry. Is she willing?" "Not yet," Denise said honestly. "But she will be when I can tell her she's federally protected. Under the federal whistleblower statute, the moment she agrees to cooperate with our investigation, her employment and professional record are fully protected from retaliation." Warper's voice was careful and precise. "That protection is immediate and enforceable. Tell her that." "I will. You'll have a formal letter of federal inquiry by end of day. That letter changes the legal landscape of everything currently in motion at the OPS level. The union will see it. Their attorneys will advise them accordingly." He paused. "They're going to know the ground has shifted." "Good," she said. "I want them to know." She called Tracy at 9:15. She told her about Warper. She told her about the federal inquiry. She read her the exact language of the whistleblower statute protection. Slowly, clearly, every word. When she finished, the line was quiet. "No one ever told me I could be protected," Tracy said. Her voice was not frayed this time. It was something else. Something that sounded like a person setting down a weight they had been carrying so long they had forgotten it wasn't part of them. "I know," Denise said. "That's what they were counting on." A long breath on the other end of the line. "Tell me what I need to do," Tracy said. By noon, the formal documentation package had been submitted to Marcus Warper's office. Angela had completed her witness submission at Sandra Oscar's office with the camera evidence. The federal letter of inquiry was received at the OPS at 4:17 p.m. At 4:22, Denise's phone rang. It was Sandra. "Green just called me," Sandra said. She sounded, for the first time since this had started, like she was almost smiling. "He wants to know if we're open to a conversation." Denise looked at the window, at the parking lot below, at the building that had tried to swallow her on day one and had spent every day since trying to finish the job. "Tell him we'll see him at the hearing," she said. She hung up. She looked down at her legal pad. At the 3 fronts, mapped and sequenced, and now, all 3 of them, in motion. She drew a single line through each one. Then she turned to a fresh page, wrote the date at the top, and kept working. The machine had a wrench in it now, a large one. He was standing outside her office door at 7:43 a.m., day 7. The building was filling up around him, morning shift arriving, the familiar sounds of the precinct coming to life. But Delavan was standing completely still in the middle of all of it, like a man who had walked somewhere and forgotten why, and then remembered, and wished he hadn't. He looked terrible. Not sick, not physically, but the particular terrible of a man who had spent the night arguing with himself and lost. His uniform was neat, his face was shaved, but his eyes had the hollowed quality of someone who had been awake since 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling while something they had been avoiding for 15 years finally cornered them in the dark. Denise saw him from the end of the corridor and slowed her pace without stopping. She covered the last 20 feet at the same even speed, stopped in front of him, and waited. He looked at her, opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I need to talk to you," he said, "if you'll let me." She looked at him for a moment, at the hollowed eyes and the careful hands, and the expression of a man holding something he needed to put down. "Come in," she said. He sat across from her desk, with his hands clasped in his lap, leaning slightly forward, like a man in a waiting room bracing for difficult news. Except he was the one who had come here. He was the one who had brought the difficult news with him. She waited. She had learned a long time ago that people who needed to say hard things required space to say them. Rush them, and they retreated. Give them silence, and most of them filled it. Delavan filled it. "Penfield called me last night," he said. "Around 9. He looked at his hands. He wasn't asking. He made it clear that he expected me to stay consistent in whatever I said to the OPS. Those were his words. Stay consistent. A short, humorless exhale. He reminded me of how things work at the 9th. He reminded me that we'd been through a lot together, and that people who understood how things worked tended to come out fine. His jaw tightened. People who didn't. "That's a threat," Denise said. "Yes," Delavan said simply. "It is." He was quiet for a moment. She let him be quiet. "I've been at this precinct for 15 years, he said. "I've watched things happen in this building that I looked away from. Not because I didn't know they were wrong. Because it was easier. Because the price of not looking away seemed—" He stopped. "Seemed too high." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. He leaned forward and placed it on the desk between them. "That's a written recantation of the statement I filed with the OPS on day 5. Every part of it that shaded toward Penfield's version, retracted. I've noted that my original statement was influenced by pressure from Sergeant Penfield, and does not accurately represent what I witnessed or knew." He sat back. "I'll testify truthfully at the hearing. Whatever that costs me, I'll pay it." Denise looked at the document. She didn't pick it up yet. "What changed?" she asked. Not accusatory. Genuine. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved across his face, complicated and private. The expression of a man revisiting something he normally kept behind a closed door. "My daughter joined the force," he said. "Different precinct. 3 months ago." He paused. "She called me last week. She was excited about a new sergeant she'd be working under. Said he seemed fair. Said she felt like she was going to be okay there." He stopped. His voice had changed. Quieter. Like he was talking to himself as much as to her. "And I sat in my kitchen last night after Penfield's call, and I thought about her walking into a break room. And I thought about Tuesday morning. The room was very still. I thought about the fact that I was in this building when it happened," he said. "And I did nothing." He looked up at Denise directly. "I have been doing nothing for 15 years. And I have a daughter who just put on a badge." She held his gaze. She thought about 6 names in a column on her legal pad. About Tracy Barry and a box under a bed. About Priya's shaking hands and the young officer in the corner who had been sitting in this building for 3 years, doing the math on what speaking up would cost her. She thought about all the Frank Delevins in all the precincts in all the years. The men who weren't cruel, who weren't the ones pouring drinks or filing false complaints, but who had learned to make themselves invisible when it mattered, who had calculated the cost of doing the right thing and decided the price was too high, and then sat in kitchens at 9 p.m., listening to threats on their phones, slowly understanding what their silence had been, building toward all along. She didn't offer him absolution. It wasn't hers to give. The 6 people in that column hadn't put her here to forgive the men who watched it happen. But she also understood that a man who arrived late at the right choice was still a man who had arrived. "I need you at that hearing," she said. "Truthful testimony. Everything you know, and everything you saw, and everything you were told to stay consistent about." She held his gaze. "Can you do that?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. "Then be in that room." She picked up the recantation document and placed it in her folder. "That's what I need from you." He nodded. He stood, straightened his jacket, with the careful hands of a man trying to hold himself together through the force of small physical actions, and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame. She recognized the posture. Priya had stood in the same spot a few days ago, with the same uncertain wait about whether to say one more thing. "For what it's worth," he said, without turning around. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For 15 years of it." She looked at the back of his head, at the graying hair and the tired shoulders of a man who had finally, at great personal cost and considerably late, done the thing he should have done a long time ago. "Be in that room, Lieutenant," she said. "That's worth something." He left. She sat alone in her office for a moment. The building moved around her. Phones, footsteps, the radio from dispatch down the hall. She looked out the window at the precinct floor below. Penfield was at his desk, head down, focused, performing the ordinary morning of a man with nothing to worry about. He had made his calls. He had applied his pressure. He had done everything the machine had always done, and he was waiting, with the confidence of long practice, for it to work. He had no idea that the last person he thought was his had just walked through her door. She picked up her pen. She turned to the hearing preparation section of her legal pad, the one she had started the night before, and she kept working. The City Hall conference room was on the 4th floor. Denise arrived at 8:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the hearing was scheduled to begin. She wanted to be in the room before anyone else. She wanted to see it empty, understand its dimensions, and choose where she would sit before anyone else could make that choice for her. The room was long and narrow, with high windows along one wall that let in flat morning light. A rectangular table ran down the center. 3 chairs on one side for the OPS panel. a DOJ observer seat at the near end. Two tables facing each other across the open floor. One for the department's case, one for the union's. She set her files down at the department table. Clean stack, tabbed and indexed. Every document in the exact order she would need it. Then she stood at the window and waited. Angela arrived first. She came in carrying a 3-inch binder, navy blue, labeled in clean block letters, and set it on the table beside Denise's files without a word. She sat down, folded her hands, and looked straight ahead. 20 years of documentation, every page of it earned. Sandra Oscar arrived at 8:30 with her briefcase and a focused, quiet energy that Denise had come to rely on. They exchanged a brief look, the look of two people who had been through something difficult together and were nearly on the other side of it. Tracy Barry came in at 8:40. She was wearing a dark blazer. Her hair was pinned back. She looked composed of someone who had worked very hard to get there and intended to hold it. She found Denise's eyes across the room and held them for a moment. Denise gave her the smallest nod. Tracy sat in the gallery behind the department table. She placed her bag on the floor, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at the wall ahead of her like she was reading something written there that only she could see. Priya Nadler came in quietly at 8:45 and sat beside Angela without being asked. Her hands were still. Today, they were still. At 8:50, Delavin entered. He paused in the doorway for exactly 1 second, long enough to see which side of the room Denise was on, and then walked across the floor and sat down behind her. He said nothing. Neither did she. Penfield and Steck arrived at 8:55. They came in with their union attorney, a tall man named Garrett Colton, who carried his briefcase like a man accustomed to winning, and they moved to their table with the coordinated ease of people who had rehearsed their entrance. Steck was in his dress uniform. Penfield was in his, every button sharp, his posture calibrated to project confidence. He scanned the room as he entered. Force of habit. The king checking his kingdom. His eyes moved across the gallery and found Tracy Barry. Something happened in his face. Fast, involuntary, and gone in under a second. But she had been watching for it, and she saw it. The slight contraction. The almost imperceptible recalibration of a man who had expected a different room than the one he had just walked into. His eyes moved to Delavin. This time the reaction was harder to hide. His jaw tightened. His chin came up. He looked away and sat down, and she watched him lean close to Colton and speak in a rapid, low voice that Colton answered with a slight, professional nod. The 3-member OPS panel entered at 9 a.m. exactly. They took their seats at the head of the table. Panel chair Miriam Olive, retired judge, 63, with the patient and immovable energy of a woman who had presided over difficult rooms for 40 years and found none of them particularly surprising anymore. 2 assessors flanked her, notebooks open. The DOJ observer, Marcus Warper, was already seated at the end of the panel table. He had been there, Denise realized, since before she arrived. He introduced himself to the room with a brief, precise statement. The hearing's findings would be incorporated into a federal civil rights review of the 9th Precinct covering a 6-year period. All testimony was subject to federal perjury statutes. The room temperature dropped several degrees. Colton shifted in his seat. He leaned toward Penfield again. This time Penfield didn't lean back. The hearing moved with the clean, methodical pace of a process that had been properly prepared for on one side and had not been on the other. Sandra Oscar presented the department's case in careful sequence. The break room incident. Priya's first-hand account, formal and detailed, delivered without flinching. The pattern documentation. Angela's 6-year cross-referenced files, each name and date and outcome laid out in plain, unambiguous order. The camera sabotage evidence, the original maintenance request, Penfield's signature, the timeline showing premeditation. Warper received each document with quiet attention and made notes on his legal pad. Oscar presented Tracy's written deposition last. She read the relevant sections aloud, clearly and without editorializing, and the room listened to a woman describe in her own words what had been done to her, and what it had cost her, and how she had carried it for 3 years before someone had given her a reason to put it down. The gallery was completely silent. Denise did not look at Penfield. She had decided at some point in the previous 24 hours that she would not spend this hearing watching him. She had spent enough of the last week watching Dale Penfield. This morning, she watched the panel. She watched Miriam Olive read. She watched the judge's face as she absorbed each document, not a performance of reaction, not a performed expression of judgment, just the steady, thorough attention of a woman building her understanding 1 page at a time. That was enough. That was everything. Colton called for a recess at 11:15. He requested 15 minutes. Olive granted 10. Colton and Steck and Penfield moved to the corner of the room. Colton spoke. Steck listened. Denise watched, not directly, from her peripheral vision, and saw the moment Steck's posture changed, saw the slight collapse in his shoulders, saw him look at the floor and nod at something Colton said. The 10 minutes became 15, then 20. At 11:37, Colton approached Sandra Oscar. They spoke quietly for 4 minutes. Sandra came back to the table and leaned close to Denise. Steck wants to negotiate. Resignation in exchange for a cooperative statement and no criminal referral on the harassment charge. A pause. Colton advised him. He read the room. Denise looked at Sandra. What are the terms on the certification? Permanent ban. He will never hold a law enforcement certification in any state. She looked at the table for a moment, at the clean stack of files they had built over 7 days from nothing but the truth. Accept it, she said. The panel reconvened at 11:45. Steck's resignation was formally entered into the record. His certification ban was noted. He walked out of the room without looking at anyone. Penfield sat alone at the union table. Colton was still in his seat, but something had changed in his posture. The subtle repositioning of an attorney who has just watched his stronger case walk out the door and is now doing the math on what remains. Penfield looked straight ahead. His jaw was set. His hands were flat on the table. He was going to fight. She had known he would. Olive looked at him across the room with the patient, untroubled expression of a woman who had seen this posture before. The last stand posture, the posture of a man who believed that force of will and the sheer audacity of refusing to yield would somehow alter the weight of documented evidence. Mr. Penfield, she said, you may respond to the department's presentation. Penfield stood. He spoke for 22 minutes. He invoked his 6 years of service. He attacked the credibility of the pattern documentation, calling it selective and agenda-driven. He questioned DeLavin's recantation, characterizing it as coerced. He called Tracy Berry's account unverifiable. He performed, with practiced skill, the role of a man who had been wronged. Olive let him finish. She did not interrupt. She did not react. She sat with her hands folded and her eyes on him, and she let every word land in the record exactly where Penfield intended it. Then she opened her folder. Judge Olive looked down at the page in front of her, and the room went so quiet that Denise could hear the pen moving across Olive's notepad as she prepared to read. Miriam Olive read without looking up. She read the way judges read, without performance, without pause, without any indication that the words in front of her were anything other than exactly what they were. Facts. findings. The accumulated weight of documented truth laid out in the precise language of consequence. In the matter of the pattern documentation submitted by the Office of the 9th Precinct, she began, "This panel finds the following. The room was absolutely still. Between the years 2019 and 2024, 6 officers assigned to the Westfield Police Department's 9th Precinct departed under circumstances that, when examined collectively, constitute a demonstrable pattern of targeted attrition." She turned a page. These departures were disproportionately concentrated among female officers and officers of color. In each case, the departure was preceded by a period of documented harassment, a union complaint filed against the departing officer, and in 3 cases, a strategic disclosure of unverified conduct allegations to local press. She paused, not for effect, to turn the page. The panel further finds that the break room incident of day 1, in which a superior officer was subjected to deliberate physical humiliation in the presence of multiple witnesses, was not an isolated act of misconduct. It was consistent with the established pattern, and was carried out with the expectation of institutional impunity. Penfield's attorney made a small note on his pad. His face was professionally neutral. His pen was moving too fast for neutral. The panel finds that the surveillance camera serving the break room area was rendered non-operational by a maintenance request submitted by Sergeant Dale Penfield 5 days prior to Captain Montana's first day, 2 days before her appointment was publicly announced. Olive looked up for the first time. She looked directly at Penfield. The panel finds that this constitutes premeditated obstruction of evidence and deliberate interference with the command authority of a superior officer. Penfield stared back at her. His jaw was a hard line. His hands were flat on the table. He was still performing, still holding the posture of a man who would not yield. Olive looked back down. In the gallery, we note the presence of former Officer Tracy Barry, whose written deposition this panel has reviewed in full. A brief pause. Her account is consistent, documented, and credible. The panel further notes that an anonymous contact was made to her current employer on the morning of Day 5 of this proceeding, suggesting conduct-related reasons for her resignation from the department. This panel characterizes that contact as witness intimidation and refers it to the appropriate authorities for criminal review. In the gallery, Tracy Barry sat very still. Her hands were in her lap. Denise could see them from where she sat, not shaking, completely still. The stillness of a person who has been waiting a long time for something to be said out loud in an official room. Olive set down the findings document and picked up a second page. This panel's determination regarding Sergeant Dale Penfield. Penfield's attorney put his pen down. The panel finds that Sergeant Penfield's conduct constitutes a sustained and deliberate pattern of targeted harassment, systematic abuse of institutional authority, premeditated obstruction of evidence, coordinated interference with the command authority of a superior officer, and the willful cultivation of a hostile work environment that caused measurable harm to multiple officers over a period of not less than 5 years. The room received each word. The panel's recommendation is as follows. Olive's voice did not change. It was the same measured, unhurried voice it had been since she began. Termination from the Westfield Police Department, with cause, effective immediately. Forfeiture of pension benefits, subject to formal review proceedings. Referral of the premeditated evidence obstruction charge to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review. Referral of the witness intimidation matter to both the District Attorney and the federal authorities in coordination with the ongoing DOJ inquiry. She placed the second page on top of the first. This panel further recommends a full departmental review of all union complaints filed at the 9th Precinct over the past 6 years, with particular attention to cases involving the departure of female officers and officers of color. She folded her hands. The hearing is concluded. The sound that followed was not loud. It was the sound of a room exhaling, chair legs on the floor, papers being gathered. The small, ordinary sounds of people coming back to themselves after something significant had passed through the space. Penfield stood. His attorney said something to him. Quiet, professional, the language of damage management. Penfield was not listening. His face had gone gray beneath the controlled expression, the performance finally running out of fuel. The posture of a man who had believed so completely and for so long in his own untouchability that the reality of this moment had no framework to land in. He looked across the room, at Denise. She met his eyes. She held them for exactly 1 second, not with anger, not with satisfaction. With the same calm, unhurried recognition she had given him in the break room 8 days ago, when coffee was dripping from her braids onto the floor and he had been waiting for her to break. She hadn't broken then. She looked away first this time. By choice. Because she was done with him. She looked at Angela instead. Angela Reeves was sitting with her 3-inch binder closed in front of her, both hands resting on top of it. And she was crying. Quietly, without embarrassment, the way a person cries when something they have carried for a very long time is finally put down for good. 20 years of documentation, 20 years of watching and recording and filing things away, in the hope that one day they would matter to someone who had the authority to act on them. They had mattered. Sandra Oscar touched Denise's arm lightly and said, "It's done." Denise nodded once. She looked at Priya Nadler, who was staring straight ahead with her jaw set and her eyes bright, holding herself together with the careful discipline of a young officer who was still on duty and knew it. She looked at Delavan. He was looking at the table in front of him. He was not crying. He was not celebrating. He was sitting with whatever it felt like to finally be on the right side of something and know it had come too late for too many people. She looked at the gallery. Tracy Barry had her eyes closed, just for a moment. Her face was turned slightly upward, like a person feeling sunlight for the first time after a long time indoors. Then Tracy opened her eyes and found Denise across the room. She didn't smile. Neither did Denise. They just looked at each other. Two women who had walked through the same fire from different directions and had come out on the same side of it. Washington caught her eye from across the room. He gave her the smallest nod, the same nod he had given her in the assembly room on day 1 from across a room that hadn't known who she was yet. She nodded back. She was the last one to leave. Everyone else filtered out. The panel, the observers, Sandra, Angela, Priya, Delavan, and finally Penfield, who left without looking back, followed by his attorney's quiet, urgent voice in the corridor. Denise sat alone in the hearing room for 3 minutes. She looked at the high windows and the flat afternoon light coming through them. She looked at the rectangular table and the empty chairs. She looked at her clean stack of files, tabbed and indexed, every document exactly where she had put it, nothing out of place. She thought about a gas station parking lot at 6:12 a.m. on day 5, about a travel mug of cold coffee held in both hands outside a building at 7:42 a.m. on day 1, about a bathroom mirror and a damp uniform and a decision made in the silence of a locked room. She thought about 6 names in a column. She stood up. She buttoned her jacket. She gathered her files in one clean motion and walked to the door. She did not look back at the room. She walked out into the corridor, and without breaking stride, she headed for the elevator. She had work to do. 3 weeks later, Tuesday morning, the same day of the week she had first walked through that door, Denise pulled into the parking lot at 7:43 a.m. 1 minute later than day 1, a fact she noted without particular significance, and then let go. She turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the quiet of her car. Not because she was preparing herself, not because she needed to steal something, or settle something, or talk herself into what came next. Just because it was a Tuesday morning in early autumn, and the light was good, and she had learned, over 15 years, and especially over the last 3 weeks, to take the quiet moments when they came. She picked up her bag and got out of the car. The precinct lobby was the same as it had always been. Same faded sign above the door, though someone, she had put in the maintenance request herself 2 weeks ago, had replaced the burned-out bulb behind the W. The sign read, Westfield in full now. All letters lit, pale yellow and steady. Small thing. Real thing. She pushed through the front door, and the desk officer looked up, came to attention. "Good morning, Captain." "Good morning," she said, and kept moving. The changes were not dramatic. She had not wanted dramatic. Dramatic was loud and performative and faded. She had wanted structural, the kind of change that embedded itself into the daily operations of a building and stayed there long after the headlines moved on. New complaint intake process. All formal complaints now logged through the Civilian Administrative Office, Angela's office, with a mandatory timestamp and a copy filed directly with the OPS. No more paperwork that got lost. No more maintenance requests that disappeared into a backlog. Every document, every date, every signature. Permanent and visible. Officer wellness check-ins. Voluntary, confidential, and made available through an external provider with no internal reporting chain. Priya had suggested it. Denise had approved it within 48 hours. A mandatory review of all open and closed union complaints filed at the 9th going back 6 years, being conducted jointly by Sandra Oscar's office and a DOJ-appointed assessor. Slow work, careful work, the kind that didn't make the front page but mattered more than anything that did. These were the things she had built in 3 weeks. There would be more. She stopped at Angela's desk on her way upstairs. Angela was already at her keyboard, reading glasses on, a fresh coffee beside her monitor. She looked up when Denise approached, and the expression on her face was the one it had settled into over the past 3 weeks. Not the careful professional neutrality of a woman waiting for a reason to trust, but something more open, more present. The face of a person who had put something down and found out she could move more freely without it. "Morning, Ms. Reeves." "Morning, Captain." Angela paused. "You have a call at 9 from Sandra's office, and—" She reached to the edge of her desk and produced a small envelope. "This came for you yesterday afternoon, hand-delivered." Denise took it. Her name on the front, handwritten. She recognized the writing. She put it in her jacket pocket and headed upstairs. Priya was in the corridor outside the bullpen, heading toward the equipment room with a case file under her arm. She stopped when she saw Denise and straightened. Not the reflex straightening of a junior officer in the presence of command, but the particular straightening of a person who was proud of where they were standing and who they were standing in front of. "Detective track orientation is Friday," Priya said. There was something in her voice that was new. Not louder, fuller, like a person who had finally found the room their voice was meant for. "I know," Denise said. "I signed your paperwork yesterday." Priya nodded. She started to move past, then stopped. She looked at Denise with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of someone who had decided that saying the thing was better than not saying it. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it." Denise looked at her, at the third-year patch on her sleeve, at the steady hands that had shaken when they'd signed a statement in this building 3 weeks ago and were not shaking now. "You did the hard part," Denise said. "You showed up and told the truth. The rest was paperwork." Priya almost smiled. Then she did smile, brief and real, and headed down the corridor. Her office was the same small room it had always been. The plant on the windowsill was not dying anymore. 3 weeks of consistent watering had done something improbable to it. New growth at the top, small and green and slightly ridiculous against the gray sky outside the window. She had not replaced it with anything better. She had just kept watering it. She sat down at her desk. She opened her jacket pocket and took out the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. She opened it. Captain Montana, I got a call from my boss this morning. He said he looked into the situation further and wanted to apologize personally for the questions he asked. He said he was sorry for any distress caused. I've been a paralegal for 3 years. I like my work. I'm good at it. I'm not coming back to the force. That chapter is finished for me, and I've made my peace with that. But I want you to know something. For 3 years, I carried what happened at the 9th, like it was my fault, like I had done something wrong by refusing to stay quiet and go along. I couldn't put it down. I tried, and I couldn't. I put it down the day you called me and told me the protection was real. I put it down in that hearing room when Judge Olive said my name and said my account was credible and said what happened to me was wrong. Nobody in an official room had ever said that before. I hope you know what you did. Not just for me, for all of them, for the ones before me and the ones who would have come after if you hadn't walked into that building. Thank you for being the kind of captain worth trusting. Tracy Denise folded the letter. She held it in both hands for a moment. She looked out the window at the parking lot below, at the Westfield sign visible from this angle, all letters lit, steady and even. She thought about a woman with a box under her bed. 3 years of documents kept in the dark on the chance that someone would eventually come along who was worth handing them to. She thought about 6 names in a column. She thought about a break room and a cup of iced coffee, and 43 officers in an assembly room watching a damp-collared woman pin an insignia to her own collar. She placed the letter in the top drawer of her desk. She closed the drawer. She opened the first personnel file of the morning. Outside her window, the parking lot was filling up. Officers arriving for the morning shift, moving across the asphalt in 1s and 2s. Some of them still hadn't made their peace with who was running this precinct. Some of them probably wouldn't for a while. That was fine. She didn't need their peace. She needed their performance, their professionalism, and their compliance with a code of conduct that was now being enforced by someone who had read every file in this building and intended to keep reading. The rest would come with time. Or it wouldn't. And she would deal with that, too. She turned a page. She picked up her pen. The morning light moved across her desk in long, even angles, and the precinct hummed around her. Phones and footsteps and the distant sound of dispatch. The sounds of a building at work. Her building. Her precinct. She kept her eyes on the page and her pen moving. And she did not look up. She had work to do. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.